Currently, walleye aquaculture relies on the collection of gametes from wild fish. Aquaculture can't rely on wild gametes because collection from wild sources is subject to a lot of variations in weather. Additionally, there's issues with biosecurity, and fish in the wild only spawn once per year. And ideally in aquaculture, you could have multiple times where you're bringing in eggs from spawning fish. So because of that, there's a desire and demand for developing out-of-season spawning for an intensively reared walleye broodstock. This would reduce the potential disease risks of bringing in wild gametes, and it would also provide that much needed multiple cohorts of fish that you could bring to market throughout the year. Here at NADF, we've successfully been raising walleye in an intensively reared system for many years, and currently have a successful intensively reared broodstock that allows us to do some of these studies where we manipulate the photoperiod and winter temperatures for that broodstock. So we've had a lot of success with this system, and hopefully this allows us to answer some of the critical bottlenecks needed for walleye broodstock going forward. For this study, we provided 3 different experimental treatments intended to induce out-of-season spawning at 3 different times during the year. One treatment shortened the winter duration period to try to induce spawning early in approximately February. One treatment was typical normal in-season spawning, where these fish were induced to spawn in April. And then one treatment was delayed late season spawning, where we extended the winter period and induced spawning in July. For each treatment, we started dropping down the water temperature in fall. We started at approximately 22 degrees Celsius as our summer temperature, and slowly dropped that temperature down to 8 degrees to start the winter period. Our different treatments had variations of the duration of the winter period, and as we were bringing fish up to be ready to spawn, we would raise those water temperatures from 8 degrees Celsius to 10 degrees Celsius to try to initiate that spawning behavior and gonadal development. So we would hold these fish at 10 degrees Celsius until spawning was completed for that cohort or that treatment. Our photoperiods matched each treatment in the sense that during the winter duration, photoperiod was much shorter, and it was increased as we began to warm these fish up to simulate spring and try to initiate spawning. We found that it is possible to initiate spawning out of season, specifically early for these fish. So our walleye were able to spawn early in February, months before they would normally spawn in nature. But this did come with some trade-offs. These early spawning fish had reduced egg production, smaller eggs indicating poorer egg quality, and ultimately had lower survival through the larval systems. However, we did observe some survival through those larval systems and growth that was comparable with the in-season spawned fish. Looking at the late season spawn treatment, we found that there were no viable gametes produced by these fish held in an extended winter period. So we ultimately found that delaying spawning to the late season was not viable for walleye. While we observed a mixed success in spawning walleye out of season, it's important to note that this was the first season where these fish were induced to spawn out of season. It's possible that going forward, if these fish were kept on that early or late shifted spawning regime and phase shifted rather than induced out of season, that we would see better success. So going forward, we're hoping to look at this with our walleye broodstock and see if multiple generations of shifted spawning result in better broodstock performance. We're also, going forward, planning to look at the specific winter temperature criteria required for successful reproduction for walleye. Walleye require cold temperatures in the winter to adequately set their gametes. So figuring out what specific temperatures are required for this is a really important bottleneck going forward for developing an intensively reared walleye broodstock. This study was funded by Wisconsin Sea Grant and National Sea Grant.